to do, I'm bring up Dr. Kenneth Newman, who's going to do a presentation on education, history of education in Jackson and Madison County. I've seen his presentation before, and it's a really good presentation, and it's all yours.
Let me go ahead and apologize for my voice. Got up last Thursday and I'm working on laryngitis. And so before I called David to tell him that I could do the program, I thought, well, I'll go to the doctor and give that a chance. And so I just finished my medication today, so I have my water just in case. There's going to be a slideshow that will loop as I talk, so you'll have something to look at and will look at me. And then at the end, if you want to ask any questions, or we could even stop and go back to some of the slides if that will help you. Recently, I jokingly referred to myself as having been involved in education in Jackson-Madison County for almost 100 years. Now you're supposed to laugh.
I think I see your picture, right?
However, when I stop and think about it, that's closer to the truth than I probably would really like to think. Considering that I started to Bemis Elementary at age 5, moved to Melissa School in 4th grade, then to Southside's brand new building in the 10th grade. I was at Union University for 3 years as a student, then student taught at Southside during that 3rd year, then was hired to teach at Northside in May prior to my graduation from Union in August. In the meantime, now to fill in those 2 missing years in there, my 3 siblings attended Melissa's and Southside, so I was always actively involved in their activities. When I was interviewed for my position on the school board, I told them that, like the State Farm commercial says, I've seen it all. Because I went to school and started teaching during segregation, participated in desegregation, moved on to consolidation, then to administration, and finally to higher education. My educational journey has taken me to Northside High School, to East High Elementary, to West Senior High, back to Northside, to Central Office, and to Union University, where I still am, and now serve on the school board. So, close to 100 years. I prepared this for bicentennial. I'm on the bicentennial commission and have served as the chair of the education committee for the bicentennial. And in September, our first Friday forum, the first month was education, so I prepared this for that. In the meantime, it has changed. I've added to it, and it's real interesting when you present programs to genealogical societies. I learned the first program I did, people don't mind telling you you're wrong. They correct you, and I learned not to let it hurt my feelings. But there's always somebody who can add something, and so I'm going to have some instances of what I've learned, because I've worked with the community heritage committees, and I've learned things as I've done that. And then there's something else I learned that I'm going to share with you in a little bit. I'll be reading a big part of this, but I'm going to intersperse my story. Since I said that I've been involved in it 100 years, I thought I might as well include myself in it, even more than I have already. But education has always been a priority for Jackson-Madison County, as evidenced by the early settlers seeking educational opportunities for their children upon arrival to the area. And as people came in and settled, one of the first places they settled was out in the Cotton Grove community. And they were looking immediately for education for their kids and for churches, and sometimes the church and the school were the same thing, the same building. According to tradition, a log schoolhouse was built northwest of Jackson in 1822. So Jackson-Madison County started in 1821, 1822, and so in 1822 we have the first record of a log schoolhouse that was built. The Jackson Male Academy opened in February 1823, and the Jackson Female Academy was in operation in 1824. Private male and female academies opened in communities some distance from the city, namely there was one in Denmark and there was one in Spring Creek. Education, it seems, was only available for the best families, those could afford either the private academies or the subscription schools that were common in rural areas where a group of people came together and paid for their kids to be taught by someone, and some of the families brought in tutors and everything with them as they came. Madison County public schools began their struggle for existence in 1839 with the state legislature's bill in 1838 to establish a state bank in the amount of $100,000 annually for the support of public education. Madison County received $2,176.66 for its population of 3,184 students. Despite the scarcity of funds, District 1 built a new school for $15. About 40 schools were in existence in 1841, but around the turn of the century, there were almost 100 schools in the county. In the 1840s, school terms were 5 months long from February through June. A few were reported to be only 3 months long. One was 12 months in District 1, probably the well-to-do school built for $15. Now, just to put that into perspective, you know, we're talking about a new school for Pope. Guess what the price of that school is going to be? $48 million. But I imagine those people in the $15 school were thrilled to death for their school. It was not until 1873 when the new public school law passed that poor schools were abolished and schools were declared free to all persons between 6 and 21 years of age. Thus, the Madison County school system was formed with B.J. Campbell as superintendent. The Jackson City school system was formed then with J.C. Brooke as superintendent. The city schools reported 457 students during his tenure. During that time, according to my good friend Virginia Conger, a teacher's salary was $36 a month, and that was probably on the high end of that. 9 teachers and 457 students attended school for 5 hours a day, and only single women were hired in the elementary school. According to Virginia, students were taught mainly reading, math, and grammar. They were not allowed to draw pictures in school, for drawing pictures was considered naughty. You could get in trouble. Also, smiling in pictures was considered silly. Now, you saw a picture of the school board from way back, the one he referred to, he saw a picture. They were not smiling. But then the one following that is the current school board, and some of those people are smiling. Now, you saw one who was not. I do not smile in pictures. People say smile, and I say, I am smiling. What's wrong with you? Now, at the same time that Virginia said the city teachers were making about $36 a month, county teachers made between $20 to $30 a month, depending on the size and location of the school. Historically, Jackson City teachers made more than Madison County teachers, and when we consolidated the systems, that was one of the big talking points, was to bring this county teacher's salary up to what the city teachers were making. Well, I just happened to have my pay stubs from the first year I taught. Teachers keep everything. So here are my pay stubs, all done by hand.
Wow.
And on 9/14, and I won't tell you the year because it gets too close to 100, my total salary earnings were $307.50. They took out $44 of withholding tax, $961 for Social Security, $923 for retirement, and $21 for dues. And I had a check for $222.86. But you know what? That was $222.86 more than I'd ever made in my life, so I was tickled to death. And that amounted to about $3,000 a year. So anyway, and we still have a long way to go. 3 of Jackson-Madison County's colleges had their beginnings in the mid to late 1800s. Madison Male Academy, which was formed in 1834, became Southwestern Baptist University, and then later Union University, which will be celebrating its 200 years next year. The Memphis Conference Female Institute began in 1840 and was chartered as Lambeth College in 1924. The Colored Methodist High School opened in 1882 and became Lane College around 1895. In 1967, Jackson State Community College joined the ranks of higher education in Jackson-Madison County, and I had a little moonlighting job at Jackson State for several years. Started out as working in the library at night, and I put the first card in the card catalog, which now doesn't even exist. And there's a little plaque out of Jackson State Library that says that I did that, and that I started a magazine collection. They needed magazines, so people cleaned out their storage sheds and brought the dirtiest magazines you've ever seen in your life. By the end of the night, when I got through going through them, I was filthy. So I did get a plaque.
Ken, do you mean dusty, dirty?
Dusty dirty. Dusty dirty.
Oh, okay.
What most people would have thrown away, they thought the college needed that, so I had to go through it. And the worker helped me. The color of one's skin stood at the forefront of school systems during the 50s and 60s. A note of interest, and I want you to remember this because I'm going to come back to it a little bit later, is that 5 black schools were built in 1959-60 to consolidate some smaller schools, because like I said, there were about 100 schools, and every little community had a school because they didn't have transportation. You just didn't need to walk to get there. You know, walk uphill a mile, you know, in the snow, then uphill a mile back home. So every little community had a school, so they started consolidating some schools. And there was another reason for building these 5 new schools also, which I won't say, but you can figure that out. But Greer School was one of them. Greer School was out in the Denmark community, and it was made up of 6 small schools. Denmark, which is out in the Denmark community, made up of 5 schools. Span Rosenwald, 5 schools. Tri-Community, that's out in the east part of the county near the lake, 3 schools. And then East, which is on Ashport Road, made up of 3 schools. After several lawsuits were filed to integrate schools, the end of racial segregation began with Tigard Junior High in 1962 with a very quiet integration. On January 25th, 1964, a more publicized integration took place when Brenda Monroe Moses entered Jackson High School as the first African-American student. In 1970, Mary High School and Jackson High School consolidated and became Jackson Central Mary, and that graduating class, 1971, had their 50th anniversary. They didn't get to have it last year because of COVID, and they had it this past weekend, and I saw pictures of them touring the new school, when I'm sure they didn't recognize anything from when they went to school there. Integration of students began on a small scale in 1966 in Madison County when I was teaching at Northside. Faculties were integrated in the fall of 1969 when I was transferred to East Hine Elementary during a swap out of black and white teachers. In December of that year, Federal Judge Robert McRae decreed that Madison County had dragged its feet too long, and he issued a ruling that a larger scale integration would take place in March of 1970. East then, in March, closed as a high school. The high school students, including the seniors due to graduate in May, were sent to Beach Bluff, Northside, and West High Schools, where they graduated separate from their longtime schoolmates. Now keep in mind, they had ordered their invitations and their caps and gowns and had their yearbooks underway, they had to just leave it all and go graduate somewhere else. And I think that's one of the crimes of the century. East was paired with Nova Elementary, with Nova housing grades 1 through 3, and East housing grades 4 through 6. And I was there when that happened. From that point on, Madison County schools were considered fully, and that's in quotation marks, fully integrated, but remained under the watchful eye of the courts for many years, basically from 1963 until the school system was granted unitary status in 2010, a total of 47 years. And for my 38 years that I spent with Jackson-Madison County Schools, we were under the court order all of those years. Also in 1969, Judge McRae ordered several existing schools closed. Now listen to some of the names of them. One was Pleasant Plains, St. John's, Greer, Span Rosenwald, and Blair's. Some of those schools had only been in existence for about 9 or 10 years. Of those schools, East is the only one still being used as a public school. St. John, Greer, and Span Rosenwald fell into ruin. Blair was purchased by a church, and Pleasant Plains is now a part of the Star Center campus. That was a black school, elementary school, Pleasant Plains. At the time of the Jackson-Madison County sesquicentennial in 1972, Fred Stanley was superintendent of the Jackson school system, supervising a total of 12 schools. James Walker was superintendent of Madison County Schools, also overseeing 12 schools. And one interesting side note is that no school in either the city or the county was ever named for either of those superintendents who were there for a long time and were there during the time of the desegregation. In 1989, the city of Jackson and county of Madison voted to consolidate the two school systems that had been in existence since 1873. Buddy McMillan became the first superintendent of the Jackson-Madison County School System, and there were about 24 schools at that time. And since the year I started the school, which was in the last century, by the way, Jackson-Madison County combined has had 13 superintendents, with 6 of those, that's about half, within the last 20 years. There have been a total of 12 superintendents in the former Jackson City School System and 27 of the Madison County School System. In addition to the public schools of Jackson-Madison County, there are several private schools as well as a large community of homeschool students. And I didn't realize how large that was until I started working on the bicentennial education committee and just learned what a large number we have. It's just amazing to me. In the 1860s, Dominican sisters began what is now St. Mary's School, as well as St. Joseph's, a school for black children, which closed in the late 50s to early 60s. It was located approximately where the downtown post office is located. Old Hickory Academy, incorporated in 1970, became the University School of Jackson in 1987. Jackson Christian at 1976. Trinity Christian Academy in 1986, and it was first housed in the Westover School facility. Van Drive Christian Academy in 1999, and it started out on Harts Bridge Road in a church out there, and I don't think it exists now. Augustine School in 2001, and Sacred Heart of Jesus and Family Christian School in 2004. The Family Christian School is housed in the former West Junior High building. I ran across some innovative events that are of interest. For instance, in 1909, Captain Seymour Menders, who was superintendent of Jackson City Schools, began what they call manual training, vocational training. He also created an ungraded classroom for students who had missed school due to smallpox, scarlet fever, measles, mumps, and whooping cough. I tried to find information about how they dealt with schooling during the flu of 1918, but I didn't find anything because there were some records that were lost somewhere during that time, because I lived through the pandemic 20 and 21, and I know how awful that was, so, but I thought it was interesting that they did create something to make up for learning loss for those students way back. In 1912, R.E.L. Bynum, who was superintendent of Madison County Schools, added the first vocational subject, agriculture. The Greer Agricultural School for Blacks was formed with money from the Jeans Foundation, which was created by Anna Jeans, a Quaker philanthropist, along with Booker T. Washington. This school was located in Denmark, and when it burned in 1921, it was relocated into Golden School, which is a Rosenwald school that's located where West Senior High was located, which is now the Sheriff's Department on the Jackson-Denmark Road. And you saw a picture in the Rosenwald schools. There were 5 different floor plans for them. And the one that was Golden School looked more like a house, and it was one of the prettiest ones. And 2 of them we had, the Span Rosenwald and another one, were identical. It was hard to tell which was which, and one of them put white painted stones up the driveway so I could distinguish between the 2 schools by looking at the rocks in the yard. But the Rosenwald schools were built by Julius Rosenwald, who was a philanthropist and president of Sears Roebuck, and Booker T. Washington. And they were state-of-the-art schools for black children all across the South. By 1928, 1/3 of black children were served by Rosenwald schools. And Fisk University is the repository for the records and photographs of these schools. And there are over 5,000 photographs in that collection. You can go and look at some of these, some of the interesting things. And the school in Bemis, the Rosenwald School in Bemis, they're having their Heritage Day June 25th. And they have a play, and Kathy just told me she's going to be in the play. I'm not sure what part she's going to play now. She's going to play, but anyway.
Mrs. Brogan.
I'm gonna be in the Rosenwald entourage.
The entourage. In 1916, C.B. Ijams, who was superintendent of the Jackson City Schools, enforced a rigid vaccination requirement for admission to school, and that requirement still stands. So we're, worried about the COVID vaccination and all that, and all the big to-do. Well, kids have had to be vaccinated to go to school since 1916, so they still are. Then in 1910, the city school superintendent, G.R. McGee, wrote a Tennessee history book, and then that book was used statewide as the Tennessee history textbook, which I thought was interesting. So education has always been a priority for the citizens of Jackson-Madison County going back to 1822, and the future of education shines brightly. And today, Dr. Marlon King is superintendent, and he's had the daunting task of navigating the district through a global pandemic. I can't even imagine having that on your plate. Currently, there are 25 schools in the district, with the newest being Jackson Academic STEAM Academy, JASA, which is a virtual school. And those kids do come together. They bought the building out that Union owned, that used to be, what was it, the Circuit City building? And so they can go there for various things, but generally it's an online schooling because that's what some kids like. And I went to their graduation, and it was just real interesting when they all gathered in this room. They didn't know each other. Nobody was talking to one another and all that. And I thought, well, of course not. They don't know each other. And I'm thinking, what are their class reunions going to look like? I don't imagine it'll be. Another innovative opportunity in place is the LOOP program, which places students in industry while still in high school. Another one is JCM Early College High School, which allows students to receive their associate's degree. Actually, they get that 2 weeks before they graduate from high school, which is kind of interesting. And I see the future of education, from my standpoint, consisting of more vocational opportunities, especially with the coming of Blue Oval City, because the goal is going to be to turn out students who are ready to go to work. And, you know, a lot of us, and I see on Facebook, people say, why don't they teach kids to change tires and do all these common sense things? And I think we're gonna see a whole lot more of that taking place. Because, you know, we haven't had things like home ec and stuff like that in a long time. And so we need to teach kids how to do some things. Now, here's some things I've learned along the way as I've continued researching and everything. When getting ready for the Oakville Heritage Day, I'd asked Clarence Boone, who was principal at West High School, to provide some historical background on the Salem CME Church and Cemetery on Ashport Road. That's where he grew up, still goes to church, as well as information about East Elementary School and its predecessor, New Deal School. Well, I'll show you how dumb I am. Mr. Boone called me. He said, would you look up a date for me? I want to know the date for President Roosevelt's New Deal. And I looked it up. It was like 1933, 38, somewhere along in there. And I'd always wondered, why was a school called New Deal School? Because the year I went to East, parts of that school still stood there on the side of the road. And then New Deal Road. Where did those names come from? Well, dummy, President Roosevelt paid for that school to be built, to do the New Deal. That's how it became New Deal School. So I learned something. Also, while researching for Oakville, I learned that the earliest school in that community was named Shelton School. And I had read that it was located northeast of downtown Oakville. So where I'm standing in the park, northeast east would have been right over here. So I pointed right over there. Pam Williams Giles in the audience said, that's where my house is located. So her house is where the school was. Then, a Shelton descendant who's in his late 80s spoke up and said, as a kid, we were plowing over in that area and plowed up a desktop for that school that had initials carved on it. So you just learn things as you continue doing this. Then, about 1913, an effort was made to consolidate some small schools in the northeast part of the county, two of those being the Shelton School and the Watson School. So they built a new building that would include a high school, because, you know, high schools, you know, they were few and far between. Sometimes they went to 10th grade, didn't go to 12th grade, had to go somewhere else. And I know Pope had a high school, and Browns and Spring Creek did. But they built a new school to do some consolidation, and it was on Christmasville Road, near the birthplace of a Miss Bessie Buffalo. Well, that was on Christmasville before it dead ends at the interstate. That road just ended right there when they built the interstate. They were in that school for 6 days when it caught on fire from a faulty flue, totally destroyed the school, and so the kids had to go back to their original schools. And so Pope was one that I know some people out in that community attended, and that was in existence until 1943 when Northside High School was built. Now, after hearing the announcement that I would be speaking at this meeting, I received an email from Carolyn Stewart. Carolyn, raise your hand. Okay, I have a new friend, Carolyn Stewart. Now, Carolyn is interested in the Skull Bone area. And so she said, did you know that one of the county school superintendents was from Skull Bone? His name was Kit Parker. Well, I knew the name Kit Parker because he's in the list. He was the 13th superintendent of Madison County Schools. And I knew it for another reason, because he was superintendent when my mother graduated from Spring Creek High School in 1938, and I remember seeing his signature on her diploma. Well, Carolyn sent me this information I'm gonna pass around, and when I saw Kit Parker's wife's picture, her name is Ora Lassiter Parker, I said, I know that woman. Where do I know her from? I place her downtown somewhere, and I was thinking Johnny Parker's. Well, that wasn't right. She owned a children's store called the Lambkin Shop. Who remembers the Lambkin Shop? Julia remembers the Lambkin Shop? I remember it because I remember going there with my mother, and that's where I knew Ora Lasser Parker from. Was one of the ladies who worked for her was Miss Lasker. I went to school with her son at Bemis, the South Side, and so she worked there, and she was her sister-in-law. And so that was just interesting that all that came about. And I wish I could remember where the Lambkin Shop was located, so if anybody could remember it, figure it out, tell me where it was. But you never know what kinds of history and memories will pop up when you get involved in things like this. So thank you, Carolyn, for adding to my memories now. And I did research the son. He is still living. He's 83 years old.
Oh,
He still
really?
lives in
Oh, great.
Georgia. Yeah. So I found that out. Okay, now, you want to talk about any of the schools, any of the pictures you saw, want to ask any questions, and I can make up answers.